You're listening to Backstage Leadership Conversations, brought to you by the Digital Tourism Think Tank in collaboration with Abu Dhabi's Department of Culture and Tourism. I'm Nick Hall and I'll be your host for the series, so join me as I take a global view on the exciting trends and developments happening in the MICE sector, with a multitude of truly insightful leadership conversations from truly global perspectives, all recorded right here in Abu Dhabi. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing sustainability, events for impact, horizon technologies, and considering the implications for business events and the wider sector. So if you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, be sure to do so now, wherever you get your podcasts. In today's episode, it's a true privilege to sit down with Lionel Yeo, the former Chief Executive of the Singapore Tourism Board, and a prominent figure in the tourism and business events industry. In my conversation with Lionel today, I'll be delving into his extensive experience, discussing his current ventures in the private sector, and the insight that he can share on leadership and industry trends. You'll also hear Lionel's thoughts on the evolving tourism landscape post-pandemic, the unique opportunities and challenges within the MICE sector, and a great deal more. Lionel will be sharing with me his perspective on sustainability, digital disruption, and the growing importance of mental health and emotional well-being in the business event space. He will also provide invaluable leadership lessons drawn from years at the helm of one of the world's leading tourism organizations. Lionel's experience speaks for itself. So with that said, let's have a listen at what he had to say.
Thank you for having me. My name is Lionel Yeo. I was the Chief Executive of the Singapore Tourism Board from 2012 to 2018. Since then, I've moved into the private sector and done a couple of other roles, and I sit on a few boards and do advisory work.
So tell us about your work in Abu Dhabi. What brings you here, and where do you see the opportunity for the region?
Well, I was invited to attend the Business Events Forum, which I was very glad to accept, and I will be also one of the speakers later today. And it coincides with a visit that I'm making to the Department of Culture and Tourism, starting to do a little bit of work with them around their leadership development initiatives.
Now, you led Singapore Tourist Board through a period of rapid and very, very strong growth. Obviously, when we look back at that period, it was a huge boom for tourism. We've had a lot of challenges with, of course, the pandemic, and now we seem to be back into that steady growth stage for the industry. How would you describe the industry today when you reflect on all of the disruption that we've had to face?
Well, first of all, I think you're absolutely right that the years I was at Singapore Tourism were high growth years. And in fact, the challenges we faced there were really more supply side challenges because the demand was so strong. To your question about where we are today and how we think about the last 12 months, I think what we have seen in more recent times is the rebound of tourism, including MICE tourism. The consensus analysis is that by 2024 we'll be back to peak pre-pandemic levels. But the thing about the rebound is, I think we have to understand, it's not evenly distributed. Right, because in Western Europe, in North America, I think the rebound for MICE tourism has been quite strong. Less strong in emerging Eastern Europe, less strong in Asia Pacific because I think China is not completely back as far as leisure and business tourism goes. And so there's been good growth, but unevenly distributed.
So that's quite a challenge for some parts of the industry, and it's an opportunity for others. How would you describe the MICE sector here in Abu Dhabi?
I think here in Abu Dhabi, there's a consistent and integrated strategy which they're pursuing, which is very impressive. By integrated, I mean, they are looking at transport connectivity. They are looking at the development of MICE and exhibition spaces. They are looking at their hospitality spaces in a very integrated way, and they're positioning themselves for future growth, which I think is the right thing to do.
So it's a very holistic approach.
It's a holistic and integrated approach. They are also weaving in the local culture as a differentiator. And I think that, again, is a very smart aspect of their strategy.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the Chinese market being perhaps one of the last markets to unlock and reopen after the pandemic. Obviously, we see that happening now. And when we look at air connectivity, for example, we see some big growth happening there. What do you think the opportunity for the rest of the world is that has focused so much on the Chinese market before the pandemic and perhaps is looking at the market today with a little bit of caution to see whether it will provide that strong growth that it did before?
I think cautious optimism is probably the right stance. My own estimate is that domestically, within the mainland Chinese market, you will see that recovery first. So I think 2023, 2024, it'll be very robust within China, right? Which is a continent-sized economy. But between China and the rest of the world, I think we need to be cautiously optimistic. We need to be a little bit more circumspect. It probably will not return to pre-pandemic levels in a hurry.
So we have to tread carefully as we think about the opportunities for
I think
growth.
there are still opportunities, but you have to be quite targeted and quite specific in terms of the business that you're pursuing. So it wouldn't be a massive wave, I don't think, in terms of China sort of reintegrating with the rest of the world, but there will still be, large pockets of Chinese businesses that want to reach out to the rest of the world.
Now, if we think about some of the ideas that have just been shared from some of the keynote speakers here today, we see a lot of disruption, transformation, a huge acceleration of technology right now, which is something quite exciting. Where do you see the opportunities for the sector to embrace that and see that as something that could be really positive?
I think this is a real opportunity for the sector to respond creatively to some of these megatrends. Right? The first megatrend that everybody's talking about is sustainability and climate change. And I think it's time for the sector to really step up and address this head on. It's no longer a fringe issue like perhaps it was, 5 to 10 years ago. It is a central issue. The other disruption that's been talked about is digital disruption. That's been with us for a while, and there are new technologies that continue to be introduced which have wide applications across economic sectors, including the MICE sector. And again, it's an opportunity for the MICE sector to respond creatively. And I see the responses coming in two types of applications, because there will be a B2C response and a B2B response. By that, I mean these digital technologies give us a chance to transform the experience of a MICE event goer. It also gives you an opportunity to transform how the industry is structured. Because some of the B2B applications are going to create scalable monsters and drive consolidation within the industry. So I think that's going to be very, very interesting to watch. And you're either on the side of disruption or you're the one being disrupted.
So you make your own choice.
You make your own choice in a way, and you will get the destiny that you deserve. If I may add, I think there's something else which we haven't really talked about as much, that is disrupting the MICE sector. And that's, arising from the pandemic. There's a greater awareness around mental health issues and emotional well-being. And I think this is something to watch closely, because the younger generations of MICE event goers, for them, this is a very important topic. And so again, it's a creative challenge for MICE organizers, for MICE, for cities that want to hold MICE events. How do we cater to this aspect of the well-being of the participants that come to our events? I think it's something that bears watching.
It's a very important point you just touched on there. And when we think about all of these challenges, of course, much of your work today is centered around leadership and how to guide teams and organizations through these changes. What would you say is the kind of biggest leadership lesson that we need to learn in order to have that agility to adapt to these developments?
So from my experience, I think a key leadership lesson for C-suites, for CEOs, is to understand that this is a team game. Leadership is not something you do on your own. And that's challenging. The irony is that these things collaboration is intuitive for us when we're more junior in the organization. And certainly in the playground, collaboration is very intuitive for children. But sadly, collaboration may not be intuitive for C-suite leaders. because in a way they've gotten to where they are by being very good at what they do. But when it's time for them to sort of reach across the aisle, reach across departments, reach across sectors, we sometimes need to relearn or unlearn the bad habits and relearn new ones to allow us to unlock that creative potential that comes from collaboration.
I guess that does require a huge amount of humility sometimes and openness.
It requires leaders to be vulnerable. And again, very, very difficult sometimes to ask someone who's been highly successful in their career to be open and vulnerable with their peers, with their subordinates, and even with their bosses.
Wow, it's very powerful when you put it like that. When you talked about some of these developments, these most transformative changes that we see right now, what excites you the most?
I think what excites me the most is how we're going to respond collectively to these challenges. So like we discussed previously, how are we going to collectively respond to climate change? How are we going to respond to digital disruption? And how are we going to respond to the very human-centric type of challenges that we are discovering, year by year as new generations join the workforce? Those to me are very important sort of creative challenges for the MICE sector today.
And if we were to put it into one sentence, what would you say is a great way to sum up the sector here in Abu Dhabi?
Well, the sector in Abu Dhabi, I think, is very impressive for the way it's pursuing that integrated strategy of bringing together the different elements of, hospitality, MICE spaces, connectivity, local culture, and that to me is a very impressive.
Lionel, thank you very much for taking the time to sit with us today.
You're very welcome, Nick.
In today's episode, Lionel Yeo shared his insights on the various challenges and opportunities in the MICE sector. In particular, we discussed Abu Dhabi, and he was keen to highlight the impressive integrated strategy of Abu Dhabi, which brings together many different aspects, such as transport connectivity, hospitality, and local culture. Lionel also discussed the global tourism rebound, noting the uneven distribution of recovery across regions and the cautious optimism for the Chinese market. Another key point that we discussed was the importance of responding creatively to megatrends, such as sustainability or climate change and digital disruption, themes that have been running throughout many of the discussions that we've had in this series. Lionel was keen to emphasize as well the growing importance around mental health and emotional well-being, especially in a post-pandemic world, something that was both refreshing to hear and, in particular, interesting to hear from someone with so much experience. It's clear that this is a new challenge for the MICE sector, and it's something that organizers need to address. And when it comes to leadership, Lionel spoke about the importance for successful leaders to embrace collaboration and vulnerability at the same time, even at the C-suite level, in order to navigate these challenges effectively. You've been listening to Backstage Leadership Conversations. Be sure to hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. If you're enjoying the series, why not take a moment to leave a review or get in touch and let us know what you think. Discover more industry insights by heading over to our website, thinkdigital.travel, where you'll find lots more interviews, podcasts, case studies, and industry research, all at the click of a button. Thanks to the Abu Dhabi Department of Culture and Tourism for making this possible, and thank you for joining us today.